Well, people like the EarthBound 64 Iceberg, and looking back on it, I really only scratched the surface on stuff related to the N64 Mother 3. So I ended up making this new Iceberg, and naturally, here's the video explaining all the stuff on here. Without further ado, here is the EarthBound 64 Iceberg 2. According to an interview with EarthBound 64's enemy designer Toshino Aoki, the ultimate chimera from the GBA version of Mother 3 was not in EB64.
As revealed by Masahiro Sakurai on July 17, 2001 on the Melee site, Ness was originally going to be replaced by Lucas. However, due to the multiple delays and eventual cancellation of Mother 3, Ness was kept instead. To tell you the truth, initially he was going to be replaced by the protagonist of Mother 3, but stuff happened and there was delays, so we ended up going back to the original.
In EarthBound 64, when one of your party members would run out of HP, they would turn into ghosts, just like in Mother 1 and 2. This is unlike the GBA version of Mother 3, as in that game, fallen party members just slump over instead. I suspect this was changed in the final game since death is a pretty central story element, and having party members turn into ghosts seems inconsistent with characters who actually die. Besides the 3 publicly released tracks from the development of EarthBound 64, there is confirmation from various sources of quite a few different tracks present in the GBA Mother 3, which were recycled from the N64 version. Those tracks include Mind of a Thief, Rock and Roll Spicy, Piggy Guys, His Highness's Theme, Etude for Ghosts, Big Shot's Theme, Samba de Combo, and Bon Voyage Amigo. To summarize this, starting in 2004, an image surfaced of privately owned Nintendo 64 DD prototype discs, and people suspected that an early version of EarthBound 64 was on at least one of them. Sadly, when the discs were eventually dumped many years later, EB64 wasn't on any of them. The story of the Blue Disc saga is mildly interesting, so I'd recommend checking out the page on Mother Forever for it if you're interested in learning more about this tale. This was something that many hardcore EarthBound 64 fans knew for a while, but was outright confirmed with the recently preserved 1997 EarthBound 64 footage. Flint did indeed have magic, or, as it was called in the rest of the other Mother games, PSI. This is something that wasn't present whatsoever in the final version of Mother 3. Strength is an option that shows up on both Flint and Kumatora's battle HUD in-game. What was it supposed to be? I suspect something along the lines of Flint's brute force in GBA Mother 3, but it's difficult to confirm due to the small amount of info we have on the strength ability. According to an interview with Shigesato Itoi from the December 1997 issue of 64 Dream magazine, Itoi's favourite character, story-wise, is the Drago. According to Dengeki Nintendo 64, the building in this screenshot is probably Flint and his family's house. I mean, we have no other buildings from EB64 screenshots that could be Flint's house, so I guess it is his house. This one's a bit of a long story, but to summarize, in 2018, a Japanese Twitter user posted images of a Nintendo company report document from 1998. Included with this report was a CD-ROM, and apparently one of the files on this CD was a trailer for the N64 version of Mother 3. However, the owner of this disc claimed it was the same trailer already on YouTube. Fast forward 3 years later, one of these 1998 company reports finally shows up for sale on Yahoo Japan auctions, and a few $100s later, it's in the hands of Zen. As it turns out, the person from 2018 was incorrect, as the Mother 3 footage on there hadn't previously been available on YouTube. Did they lie? Or were they just misinformed? Who knows? When characters from the N64 Mother 3 were being reimagined for the GBA version's development, a few NPCs ended up swapping their gender. Ayo went from being male in N64 to female in GBA, and interestingly, the siblings Nicole and Richie swapped both of their genders. Richie was male and Nicole was female in the N64 version, but the GBA version completely swapped this for whatever reason. Fairies is the name of one of the infamous jukebox tracks in the final version of Mother 3, and has the same leitmotif as the EarthBound 64 Tazmily theme. Since the N64 Tazmily theme isn't used as is in GBA Mother 3, it's possible that Fairies was a rendition made at some point to be used in the GBA version's Tazmily to keep that leitmotif connection with Monkey's delivery service, but only ended up being reduced to a jukebox track. This was a misconception by some publications from the West's coverage of EarthBound 64. They took the screenshot of the contest winner Hiroki, who won the competition to get his face featured in the game, and claimed that you'd be able to use the Mario Odyssey games on the 64DD to put your face in EB64. While that was a concept early on, it didn't last long. It certainly was scrapped by the time development shifted to the base N64. Mr. Kemley is the name of an NPC in EarthBound 64. They were the one first to notice the mysterious object on the coast of Greatscale Village, according to the Mother 3 Times. He's the only cut NPC from N64 to GBA that we actually know the name of, well, besides Hiroki. This is referring to another Mother 3 Times thing. Basically, throughout several issues of the Mother 3 Times, there was reported discourse within the DCMC, which was supposed to reflect the in-game event of Duster joining them at some point and then having to leave. For a long while, many people believed that the enemy that shows up in several EarthBound 64 screenshots was a boar. However, the discovery of Jinko's Space War 99 Mother 3 report earlier this year confirmed that it wasn't a boar, and in fact, it was a capybara. Not too long ago, I tried my hand at translating some untranslated Japanese EarthBound 64 magazine articles, using Google Translate and DeepL. One of the most interesting new pieces of info I found was that the battle system was a one-on-one battle against you and one enemy, one at a time, and you could swap between other members of your party to use them. In other words, the battle system was quite different to the other Mother games. You wouldn't select for everyone to do whatever at the start of each round in battle, you'd only do it for one character, and to place the other characters in your party, you'd have to swap to them by flicking the control stick.
The organ used between both GBA and N64 is different, with N64 using the Map 3 organ as can be heard here. The GBA version uses the rotary organ.
Basically, Shigeru Miyamoto and the main artist of EarthBound 64, Benimaru Ito, saw Toy Story 1 when it came out and were very impressed with the piece of media using 3D visuals to tell a story, and wanted to see how Nintendo would be able to use 3D graphics in video games to tell stories. Yeah. Beyond that, there's several connections of design inspiration you can make between the characters in Mother 3 and the characters in Toy Story, those being Flint and Woody, Hinawa and Bo Peep Peep's sheep and Flint's sheep, Rex and the Dragos, Ham and the Pig Army, Sid's toys and the Chimeras, and most obvious of all, Boney and Slinky Dog. This entry refers to the unknown pig mask head design from the 1997 cast photo for EarthBound 64. It has a color scheme similar to a life preserver, so it's possible this is the head for a Navy squeal, assuming those even existed in the N64 version. This is a quote from Shigesato Itoi from 1997, talking about the tone and story of Mother 3. I'll tell him how many times I cry when I remember I can't play EarthBound 64.
What might be surprising is that actual N64 Mother 3 merchandise exists. The first of which being a promotional t-shirt sold as a mail-in item in December 1997. The shirt is based on concert t-shirts proudly saying DCMC World Tour on the back. The other pieces of merch were stickers made for 64 Dream, being of the main family, a Sohei Castle, and the Sunshine Forest.
The name of the Pig Army soldiers in EarthBound 64 wasn't always pig masks. In some early material, their name can be translated as Pig Warriors, which seems to be in reference to their motif of being medieval soldiers with spears for weapons. One of the articles for the Mother 3 Times focuses on Ionia and their magical abilities, and in this article, they go by the alias Professor Orange Kid, interestingly enough. For a while, a few people thought this mentioning of Orange Kid meant that the character from EarthBound, would originally have returned for Mother 3 the same way Dr. Andernuts does, but I'm adamant it's just an alias for Ionia, like I said. In EarthBound 64, Flint's hat is visibly asymmetrical in a few different screenshots. It's an interesting design choice, but I like it. I feel like it'd look more unnatural if it was symmetrical instead. In an interview with Nintendo Dream from July 2006, Shigesato Itoi made a point about the final battle in the N64 version apparently having no dialogue. If you know anything about the GBA version's final battle, it's that it's almost nothing but text. So, I imagine the N64 one would be similar, but instead of all the stuff happening being described through text, it'd actually be shown on screen visually. Now doesn't that sound cool? Among the upcoming games listed as having playable demos at the Nintendo Space World 97 event, Mother 3 was going to be one of them. However, due to unclear reasons, there was no playable demo for Mother 3 at the event, with only footage of the game being shown off instead. In a Mother 3 Times article, it's revealed that the villagers of Tazmily only just now learned about using square wheels instead of triangular ones. Yeah, I guess they just don't know what circles are then. During the first EB64 Iceberg video, one of the entries was about inconsistent textures with the Space World 99 build for Mother 3. Since then, I've been informed that there's actually 3 different builds related to Mother 3 at Space World 99. There's the promotional screenshots build, then there's the trailer build, and finally there's the actual playable demo build. I'm still a little shocked that such a pedantic observation actually has an explanation. One of the early enemies shown off during EB64's promotion was a pig mask hanging from a tree. For so long, so many people thought it had been hung from its neck, but if you look at it for more than about 5 seconds, you can see it's just tied by its arms. There's some kinda scary looking sprites that are unused in GBA Mother 3 of Lucas being picked up by his head and being chucked aside. There's no context as to what these sprites could have possibly been used for originally. Also, worth mentioning, that there's unused Maskman sprites too that look sorta similar, so maybe they're related somehow? Who knows? During the Mother 3 To Everyone Who Waited cancellation interview on August 22, 2000, the day of EB64's cancellation announcement, Shigeru Miyamoto talked about how complete he felt Mother 3 on the N64 to be by the time it was cancelled. He said it was about 60% complete, but about that percentage, Iwata had to say, "Miyamoto's a very strict guy. Even if you think something's 90% done, he's the one saying, 'This ain't even halfway done.' So, if Miyamoto says it was over 60% done, you could assume it was much further along than that. Basically, this is suggesting that EB64 got even further than 60% done of its development." I already mentioned on the Iceberg before that it's been confirmed that Flint had magic in EarthBound 64. However, there is a theory that all the playable characters had magic of some form. The basis of this theory is that the battle images featuring Duster, Wes, and Salsa all have the magic meter present in them. Personally, I just think that this is the same thing as Jeff in Mother 2, where he has the PP counter displayed, but it never fills. The magic meters don't seem to be filled for the 3 characters I mentioned, but I wouldn't be surprised if the game was found one day and those 3 actually do have magic.
As mentioned by Tomato when he pre-ordered the game. Now, for the weird part. On the in-store advertisement, it said the game was to be released in May. I'd like to get a scan of that advertisement for you all, but I gotta work up confidence. Having some goofy foreigner ask to borrow a store ad isn't an everyday thing, you know. Unfortunately, Tomato never got a scan or even a picture of the store ad.
When news of Mother 3 at Space World 99 spread to other parts of the world in August 1999, and new info about the game like some of the main characters emerged, many American fans reacted unreasonably outraged over not just the fact Flint seemingly was the main protagonist, but also the fact that Ness and his friends didn't seem like they were going to return as the heroes of this game too. Try pausing this video and give a read to some of these, they sure are something. Oh boy, this entry. Let's just say I have a theory on where the two-headed Kraken fits into the story. I think that instead of having the pork tank be the final boss in Chapter 3, it'd be the Kraken and you'd fight it as Salsa, Kumatora, and Wes. Considering the screenshots we have of the pork tank fight don't have those latter two party members present, and also shows that a sneak attack has occurred, I think my theory is in the realm of possibility. Maybe I should make a video delving into how I think EB64's story timeline went. Wow, another great entry. This is another theory that stems from EB64 screenshots and trying to explain what's going on in them. We have late Chapter 1 footage of Flint in the Sunshine Forest alone, and him using magic in battle. Flint more than likely wouldn't have had magic until late Chapter 1, when Ionia grants him the ability to use PSI. So having Flint be alone in this part of the game leads me to believe Alec didn't accompany you for this part of Chapter 1, unlike the GBA version. Originally, I thought that this meant Alec may not have existed at all in EB64, since we don't have any mention of him anywhere in any EarthBound 64 material at all too. But I think it's just more likely he didn't go with you at the end of Chapter 1, but still had some sort of role in the prologue. There is no evidence in any EarthBound 64 material that Boney was actually going to be playable. Yes, he's playable in the GBA version, but I'll explain my reasoning for what I think his role in EB64 was. In N64 Mother 3 material we do have access to, he's only described as your traveling companion. A lot of the playable characters were explicitly said to be playable, such as Lucas and Duster, so it seems odd they wouldn't mention Boney as playable too, since they showed him off. By the time development was cancelled in 2000, there was 8 playable characters in the game. I believe those 8 are Lucas, Claus, Flint, Kumatora, Duster, Wes, Salsa, and Facade. I've mentioned Wes being playable several times before, but as for Facade, he was confirmed to be playable in 1996. So yeah, Boney didn't seem to be a fully playable party member. Instead, I think he was just a guest NPC who would help in battle by attacking sometimes and sniffing the enemy for their weakness, controlled by the CPU. Essentially, he'd be similar to King from EarthBound, but he'd be with you for a lot more of the game than King is. He'd also be a little bit more helpful too, I imagine. This is referring to a rumor that EarthBound Central reported on in 2014 of a YouTube user called Skater24481 apparently having played the 64DD demo of Mother 3. I'm not going to humour him too much because I'll say right now, he was obviously full of crap and wanted just to get the hopes up of people who wanted to see the game. Wherever you are, sir, please know you set society back by like 8 years. In some recently leaked internal Nintendo emails, a completion date for Mother 3 on the GBA was listed as the end of October 2005, with an unknown release date. It's worth noting that the internal project name for the game still had the N64 version's subtitle. Basically, since we know the love theme for the GBA version was composed in December 2005, it means that the new love theme was only added in after the game had been delayed. In other words, yeah, GBA Mother 3 was absolutely delayed in its development, just like the N64 counterpart, and may have suffered the same fate as to that too, if they didn't cut down on content, hence all the unused stuff in GBA Mother 3. Look very carefully at this screenshot. Notice anything odd? Well, look at the bar stools. They go underneath the floor. Basically, this part of the screenshot is out of bounds and the camera is clipping through the wall, hence why we can see under the floor. This isn't even the only EB64 thing where we can see the camera clipping out of bounds. You can even see it here too in this part of the Clayman factory. This refers to a quote from the July 2006 issue of Nintendo Dream, where Itoi describes what the ending to the N64 version of Mother 3 was like. The final version sorta has that with the end screen, so I wonder how it differed in the N64 version, if at all. I mentioned on the last Iceberg that there's an interview with Benimaru Ito that was posted to Nintendo's website in 1998, and on this page there's a section that previews some concept art for EarthBound 64. A lot of the descriptions here don't match pieces of concept art that are publicly available online, so that means unfortunately, there was concept art for this game that was once available online that's now lost. Pretty saddening.
Back in the mid to late 90s, there was a show called 64 Mario Stadium, which, during a 1999 episode, showed a longer version of the claimant getting out of the water from the Space World 99 trailer. However, much like every other piece of EB64 related video, it's lost to time.
Who is this NPC? It has to be Jackie, right? I mean, since they're standing behind the counter of the Yado Inn, that would make sense and all, but are they also this NPC? The image compression seems to indicate they might have the same color hair, but then if it is Jackie, then it'd be out of character of them to be helping move this broken tree branch, wouldn't it? We need this game to be found, not for any of the other numerous reasons it should be preserved, but because we need an answer to this. According to Togame2, a well-respected video game preservationist, or in other words, an actually reliable source, a prototype cartridge for Mother 3 on the N64 made its way to the US for Nintendo of America to consider localizing. Apparently a small amount of translation work had actually begun before it was shelved. This, of course, is not only further evidence that the game was absolutely considered for getting a localization, but also it means a copy of EarthBound 64 could be floating around somewhere in the US still today. Worth mentioning that localizations of Nintendo games back then usually occurred when a game was very close to completion, so it means this copy could be dated from as close to the cancellation of EB64. This is just a reference to a classic video from Hard for Games. Not much to say except, well, he gives some pretty good reasons why he doesn't play his copy, not gonna lie.
And the only time EarthBound 64 was ever even shown off was at Space World. It was on a development N64 flash cart, which are taller than your normal N64 cartridges, which this is definitely not that. However, we will be showcasing the unreleased Zelda.
Well, we finally got to this entry. I'm not gonna name the name of the guy who said this, but let's just say they were a massive, massive hypocrite who did nothing but cause drama and harass people within the Mother fandom, among other things. It's included here because, I want to say, the quote itself from my personal experience is absolutely not accurate. EarthBound 64 has brought out so much creativity from so many people, whether that be fan recreations to fan art, and I've met and befriended so many awesome people through this mutual interest of this cancelled game. If the person who said this happens to be watching this, please never return to the Mother fandom. Sincerely, the guy you tried to insult because I like Puyo Puyo. When the GBA Mother 3 released, Itoi admitted that as far back as the N64 version's development, he and the development team added circumstantial evidence, so if you'd like to believe Flint is Ness, you actually could. In the GBA version, I feel like it's a pretty big stretch, but looking at the N64 version, it doesn't seem like nearly as much of one. We've got Flint having PSI, just like Ness. We've got Hinawa being blonde, just like Paula. We've got Lucas's Franklin badge he got from Flint, which could be Ness's. We've got an explanation as to why Ness and Paula wouldn't remember their past identities and their PSI abilities with the white ship, and it means that we've got that connection of Porky and Ness finally meeting again, one more time. As much as it may pain some of you to hear this, it's not incorrect to say that EarthBound 64 was going to be an adventure between Ness and his son to take down Ness's old neighbor Porky after Paula dies and their other son goes missing. Yeah, imagine a world if a toy actually outright said that's what his intention was instead. And that was the EarthBound 64 Iceberg 2. I'm not sure what to say, except thank you for watching all of this. Thanks to everyone on screen for their part in making this video possible, and I'll see you all next time.